I'm Dr. Caitlin Kite, and I'm going to give you a brief introduction to communication. And this short presentation is based on actually animal communication, which was my expertise before I moved into the world of academic development. And I actually think that a lot of the lessons from animal communication are really helpful when thinking about how to do good communication between people and how to think about the communications that you do in an academic environment. So first of all, I want to think about what communication actually is. And as you can see here, a definition of communication is that it's the transfer of information between individuals. And this raises the question of what is information? Well, information is something that reduces prior uncertainty. And here it explicitly says that that's within an evolved receiver system, and what that really means is that it's within a particular context. So talking to particular intended recipients of that information within a particular environmental context. And the whole point of this is that it would therefore improve the function of that whole context and that whole process. And really what all of this science-y sort of wording means is that it is something that's not just a bunch of noise, it's not just a bunch of words or images that are being thrown out there. All of this content is something that's actually useful. It's been thought about beforehand, it's been specifically chosen to achieve some sort of purpose, and it's been presented in a way in order to get the sort of feedback and response that the communicator is wanting. And this is something that's beneficial to both the person communicating and to the person receiving that information. And that's why you continue to have that sort of communication and that sort of message exchange within that environment. And what this looks like, I think, in an academic world is that it's this information sharing about issues like, what do you want from me? Do we agree on things? What do you want to know? Can I trust you? And these are all the sorts of implicit questions that you're answering whenever you are talking about a certain thing in a certain way. And I think that in the course of working in a scholarly environment, there are all sorts of things that we want to provide information on and that we are asked to provide for information on. And this might be within the context of an assessment, of an interaction like an interview. It might be something that just is a part of daily life, the way that you interact with people around you as you work with colleagues or peers. But there are all sorts of things that through those interactions you have a chance to show to people, so that you have capabilities and you have particular traits and you are able to communicate that alongside some of the other things that you might be communicating, like particular disciplinary expertise. And sometimes these are exactly the things you are also asked to communicate and that you need to communicate. So for example, if you work in an academic environment and you want to show that you're reliable, you might show up on time every day and you're communicating therefore that you are a reliable person. So you can just think about how all of these are things that may be aspects of various communications that you do in academia. Now I also think that it's important to remember that some things are deliberate signals and some things are accidental cues. And I've kind of already alluded to that on the past slide. So what do I mean when I say signals and cues? Well, cues are things that you do inadvertently. And in the animal world, we have examples like hummingbirds, which make that buzzing sound when they fly around. They don't mean to make that buzzing sound, it's just a byproduct of their wings moving. I've got doves as another example, so doves often make kind of a whistly sound when they take off. And again, they don't mean to do that, that just happens. And what's interesting about that is that because we hear those signals, we know what's going on, we know that those animals are moving, and so we can get information from that, but that was not intended information from those animals. You see a similar sort of thing with signaling. But in the case of signaling, this is actually deliberate communication. So signals are traits that are designed specifically to modify someone else's behavior. So again, it's similar in that information is being provided, but in this case, this was actually something that was done on purpose. So wolves howling is an example. We've got pictures of cuttlefish changing their colors so that they look like a male or a female. So we see these things in the animal world, but we also see them in the academic environment, in the human world as well. As I alluded to previously, for example, where you've got certain things that you might be asked to do and certain things that might just come out in the way that you do those. And I think a really good example to really exemplify this is, let's say that you are asked to give a presentation in class and you show up wearing a suit because you want to show that you're taking it seriously and you want to look proper and you want to send the signal that you are someone who is quite invested in this class and this particular assignment. But let's say that you didn't bother to iron the suit first, and so you look a bit rumpled. Well, that's perhaps sending an inadvertent cue that you take it seriously, but only to a point. Or that you are willing to put time and effort in some places, but not other places. And that perhaps is not the message you want to get across. So there are all sorts of these things happening at the same time, even within the same signal or cue that we're providing. There might be other things on top of that, so it's really complex in how we communicate. So again, just to give some examples of how this actually might play out in the real world, there are all sorts of communication that we are providing within an academic context. Some of these are things like conversations and emails that you might be thinking of as having one particular purpose. So let's say you want to establish a meeting or you want to ask a quick question, but the way in which you do that is definitely going to have an added bit of communication on top of that. So if you email a professor and just say, hey, how are you doing? Give me an idea about this. It might make you seem like you're kind of laid back, whereas if you say, dear so-and-so, please give me some information that I accidentally missed. So the kind of informal versus formal, there's a real difference in how that comes across. And you can see that sort of thing playing out in all of these different communication media that we have here in higher education. CVs, poster presentations, meeting notes and minutes, how you dress, the suit example, your body language whenever you're giving a presentation or walking to a room. All of these are really important, and actually they're important not just now, but also as you go through thinking about working with industry partners or as you go for a job interview. These are things that carry on in life as well as within the university environment in the day-to-day. Now, to bring it back to animals again, I'd like to give an example about one particular communication within the animal world, because I think that it gives you an idea about the things that are important in terms of guiding communication and shaping communication. So a lot of us know about bird song. We hear bird song all the time, and you probably know why birds produce song. So generally it's because a male is keeping his territory, or he's advertising himself to a female, or he's telling another male that he needs to stay away. So that is the person there on the top left, or the bird in this case. There is a real intention there. There is something that that individual wants to achieve, and so they shape the signal and they send it out into the environment. And that's what we see happening right here. The signal's been produced. And once it's been produced, it goes out into the environment and it moves through the environment. And when that happens, it may be maintained or it might be lost. And in the case of a bird producing a song, as that song travels through all the trees, it's going to be attenuated because the branches will get in the way, the tree trunks will get in the way, there might be wind, maybe it's a rainy day. And so all of those things will ensure that the signal either gets to the other end intact or that it's degraded in some fashion so that it doesn't quite sound the way that it did when the communicator first developed it. So it emerges in some shape or another here at the other end and is then eventually picked up by the receiver. And the receiver in this case is a female bird. And when she hears that, she'll make some evaluations. She'll think about what that means to her. And that might differ depending on her mood, whether she was expecting it or not, the various interactions that she's had in the past. There are all sorts of things. But the point is that she'll then make some decision about how she feels about that and what she wants to do in response. And in some cases, the female might do nothing at all, and so she just flies away and has no response to the male, and actually no response is a sort of response. Or she might think, well, that male sounds pretty attractive, I want to go have a look, and so she'll fly over and go to see him. There are all sorts of things that might happen. But the point is that there has been an intention on the communicator's part. The signal has come out, and it's created the response on the part of the receiver, and the receiver then does something. And that's really key to remember, is that communication isn't just a one-way thing, that there is a loop that happens here. It needs to be closed. So once the signal comes out, it needs to have some sort of an impact. And it's also important to remember that the environment does shape that impact because it will alter the signal in some way. And all of this is stuff that you can translate into the lived human experience as well. So we do all of our communication in complex worlds. We might talk in a busy restaurant, or we might be having a phone call where the signal keeps dropping out. And we all have intention, or we should have intention, hopefully, whenever we're producing a signal and communicating in a certain way. And it really is worth taking the time to think, what do I want to achieve? And exactly how should I go about doing that to really achieve what I want in the way that I want? And so you should be shaping your signal to really get the response that you want. And then as a receiver, you also want to be thinking, you know, that person produced that communication for some reason. What do they want from me? Do they want me to give this information that they're asking for, or is there something more going on there? So you should be dissecting the signals that you get and using that to figure out your response. And the people that you're speaking to will be doing that as well, most likely. And that's why you really do have to craft your message and think about, how is this coming across? How is it being presented? Where is it being presented? And how does this impact this whole interaction? And that's really what I think boils down into the three main things that you have to think about when you're thinking about signals, is that there are three shapers of a signal: the signaler's abilities, the environment, and the audience. So every time you're crafting some sort of communication, keep these things in mind and work through them all and think about the implications and make your decisions accordingly. And I think what that then boils down to in a more practical day-to-day sort of routine is these four questions. What is your message that you're trying to get across? Or what is the goal that you're trying to achieve with a message? Who is your audience? Is it one person? Is it a group of people? What level are they at? What sort of understanding do they already have? What sorts of interests and previous experiences have they got that they're going to bring to bear on this, and so on? Thinking about the environment in which you're going to be engaging your audience. Are you one-on-one? Are you in a public space? Are you not there at all? Are you going to put something online that someone will read or that they'll download? What's that experience going to be like? Because that really shapes how the receiver will get that message. And finally, a really important one that I think a lot of people forget is, how can you measure the success of that? So with the male bird, if the female flies up to investigate closer, that's a pretty successful interaction. If she chooses to have a nest with him, that's even better. So thinking about that from the human point of view, if you've sent out an email, if you've produced a web page, if you've written an article, how can you see whether that's successful? Is it the number of replies that you get, the number of comments, the number of responses? Is it positive feedback? What does that look like, and how can you actually access that? And that will then help you to tailor your communication the next time around. So that is just a quick run through of the basics of communication, and hopefully this is information that will now stick in your mind. You can think of that bird example and bring this to bear on all the communication that you do, whether it's through assessments, or if it's for informal interactions, or for interviews and other formal circumstances. Wherever you go and whatever you're communicating, these are the essentials to keep in mind, and they will help you to make better decisions and communicate more effectively.